I think 9 years ago now, which does make me feel a bit old, but it's great that it's still running loads of events and really active. So that's really great to see. So I'm going to talk a bit about this evening the academic clinical pathway, what it is, and also give some of my experiences. I'll try and talk to you a bit about the structure of the pathway and what it might look like. Try and give you some tips on what to think about if you're considering going down the academic pathway route, and also share a few of my experiences of the pathway. So I'm a academic GP trainee. I've done a couple of jobs along the academic pathway. I'm currently taking time out to do my PhD. So I'll share some of the things I've learned along the way. I've pitched this at medical students. So if there's anyone who's a bit further down the pathway, there should also be some useful stuff there for you. And if anyone's joining from outside England, I apologize. I focused this on the pathway in England. A bit further down the pathway, it does vary a bit in other parts of the UK. So it's worthwhile looking at that, but the principles are all the same. So I often find that when I'm talking to people about academic pathways, this is what they see. Starting off at a junior doctor researcher level, so something like the academic foundation program, and you move rigidly along it, doing every single post until you reach the dizzying heights of professorship. Actually, I think that's pretty rare for people to go along it in that way in my experience, and most people I've met have actually not followed the route 100%. I think the real academic pathways are more something like this. People start off at different points, they move off, they might come back to academics. It really does vary. So I think the key thing to remember is it's really flexible. If you miss one of the early stages of the pathway, don't worry at all. There's loads of opportunities to get involved later on. So if that's true, then you might be wondering, what's the point of having a pathway at all? Well, from my experience, it gives you a bit of structure to hang your career on. It allows you to plan what your next steps might be. Along the pathway, there's loads of different posts which give you protected academic time, which is really important. It stops someone dragging you away to a clinic if they've dropped a doctor. So it gives you loads of protected time to do your research in academia. Some of the posts have particular training that you might want to do and that you need to do. Some, for instance, include master's training that has to be done. And all important money, so you should be having pay parity. You shouldn't be earning less than your colleagues who are just doing clinical work. And it's basically there to help you and make life as an academic easier, really. So without further ado, this is a representation of the academic pathway. And it's a pretty simplified one. And there's loads of complicated ones out there with extra bits. But this shows the key steps that you might want to consider if you're considering an academic career in peach, and the equivalent levels of clinical training in green. And I'm just going to walk through this and discuss what you might want to think about at some of these stages. So first of all, medical school, and I think this really is an essential part of the pathway. There's loads of opportunities to get involved in academic medicine and actually to decide what bits of it you like. And thinking back to medical school, I kind of wondered what questions I had, and I think I would have wanted to know how to get involved and actually how to make the most of the time when you are involved. And I think there's two parts of that. I think there's finding really good and supportive supervisors and mentors. So we'll talk a bit about that. And there's also choosing the best times and opportunities to do the research, and we'll talk about that. And the other question that I'm sure many of you are thinking about is how you demonstrate your achievements in research and academic medicine, which is important for applying for the posts further down the pathway. So we'll talk a bit about that too. So firstly, mentors and supervisors, and there's some differences between these in my experience. Supervisor is someone in the lab who is your boss, and they supervise your work, whereas a mentor is someone more than that. They give you tips, they give you advice to help you along your career pathway. And these don't have to be the same people. Often a mentor is a different person, and further along the pathway, actually, they're pretty much always separated. But one of the challenges I had as a student was finding good mentors. And I think one of the reasons was that I often thought of professors and senior academics as quite scary and intimidating people. And I was worried to approach them. And I think if I told you one thing today, don't worry about that. Really don't feel starstruck or whatever. Feel free to approach important people in your mind at conferences. If you're attending them, talk to them about your work and their work. Talk to them about opportunities to do some research with them. If you haven't come across anyone who really inspires you, do a Google search and find someone who is working on something that you find interesting and send them an email. Probably the best experience I've had in research has come off the back of Googling someone and sending them an email. So don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to approach people and seek advice. And I'd also say, don't always think about the most senior person or senior professor or researcher in a university. Actually, really good mentors can be people who are closer to your level. So academic foundation doctors who've been through the processes recently and know what it's like, or postdocs in the lab. So also consider approaching them and asking for some help. So there's tons of times when you can get involved in research in medical school, and I'm sure lots of you have considered these or been involved in some of these. And I'd certainly recommend doing some of them. You don't have to do everything, but get involved in some of them. And I'd also recommend trying out different types of research. As a student, virtually all my research was based in a lab, and I can assure you there's more to clinical research than pipetting. There really is. There's loads of things you can do out there, from using big data to analyze things and answer big questions, doing systematic reviews, and you can get involved in all those types of things. So try a couple of types of research and see what you like. It's the best opportunity to do that. Intercalated degrees, I think, are a really good way to get some research experience, and some of you may have done those. They also look good on a CV, and actually on some applications they get you extra points and move you up into interview places, which can be helpful. So you might want to consider them. But I've probably had the best research experiences doing a research medical elective and vacation placement. And I think as a medical student, I was pretty set on going to the Caribbean and doing my elective and spending lots of time on the beach. And in the end, I did decide to do a research elective, but I still had an amazing time. I went to Singapore and I learned a lot. And one of the things which you may want to consider if you're thinking about this is there are loads of scholarships, there's loads of bursaries out there to support this kind of thing, and to support a medical elective work if it's research, or if you want to spend a month of your summer, if you're lucky enough to be in the early stages of medical school, to go and spend a month in the lab. And that also looks good on your CV if you're applying for academic foundation posts. I'd also say that don't be put off by the fear that there's no way you're going to get these things. They aren't always that competitive. I know of one charity that actually stopped offering a medical elective bursary, which was several £1,000s, because no one applied for it. So don't be afraid to go for these things. They're there for the taking. One thing that I haven't really discussed in the kind of opportunities as a student is MB PhD. This is something that you may want to consider if you're really set on a research career and you know exactly how you want that to develop in a certain area or certain field. For me, that certainly wasn't right. I think if I'd done my PhD that early on, I probably would have done it on something which bears no resemblance to what I'm currently working on. So I think choosing the timing of your PhD is important, and I'll come back to that, but it's definitely right for some people who are very clear on what they want. So how do you show the kind of outcomes and what you've achieved during your engagement in research as a student? Peer-reviewed publications are the big thing in research often, and it's often what I know I was after as a student. And they are important. If you can have one or more peer-reviewed original research papers coming out of medical school, that's really great, but they're not essential to move along the academic pathway and get academic foundation jobs. They're really not. There's loads of other things that you can do to show what you've achieved and show that you're passionate about academic medicine. One thing that I recommend you consider is writing non-peer-reviewed publications. And I'm talking about things like communications or letters to journals. So say you've come across an article that you disagree with or that you agree with and think you could add something further to it. Just write a couple of hundred words, submit it, and it may well get accepted. Or you might want to write opinion pieces or editorial type things on something you have an interest in. And there's absolutely no reason why you can't publish these as a medical student. These are a couple of things that I published as a medical student and junior doctor. I think it's useful to do because it shows that you might not read the BMJ every week, but you're keeping abreast of some of the latest literature. You're able to analyze it and critique it, and you're able to write scientifically. And these are all skills that are helpful in academic medicine. So I'd really encourage you to have a go at some of these. And there's loads, dozens of other things you can do to show your interest in academic medicine and pick up skills at university. And the list is probably far longer than this, but joining committees like the Research Society at your university, going on skills courses. I really wish I'd gone on more statistics courses as a medical student. I could have used that. Conferences where you're able to present your work. That's going to be part of your academic life if you continue on this course for the rest of your career. So build up experience of it now. And yeah, obviously prizes and scholarships are great as well. So you're coming up to the end of medical school and you're starting to think about the academic foundation program maybe. And many of you may be at that stage. I know that there's a talk going to be coming up specifically talking about the AFPs and the application process and tips and tricks on how to get in. So I'll just run through what the AFPs are and give you my experience of them really. So the aim of AFP is effectively to give you a little bit of academic time as you enter clinical training, and so you know what it's like really to split your time between research and clinical work. The benefit of it is that it gives you around 4 months protected academic time, which is a godsend, and that allows you to focus on your academic work. You shouldn't be pulled out to do clinical work, and that can vary by post. So that might be a 4-month block, which is really good if you want to do lab-based stuff, or it might be 1 day a week. So if you're thinking about applying, you might want to think about how that time is distributed by the post. Although I'm focusing on research, they can be done in other things depending on the post, like medical education, if you have an interest in that. And if you're applying, I'd really look at the post and what it entails, because some are really specific on what you can do. Plastic surgery is great if that's what you're interested in. For me, I chose a really flexible one in Manchester, which allowed me to do research on whatever I wanted. So if you're not sure exactly what you want to do, you might want to apply for one of those posts. So in terms of getting one of these posts, I think the thing which certainly frightened me when I was applying, and maybe frightens other people as well, is the academic interview. And this is something that you're going to experience all the way along the pathway. Every job, every academic job I've applied for, I've gone to one. So I think build up skills at doing this now, and it will serve you really well in the future. And I think the only way to do that is to practice. So the AFP interviews normally involve some academic scenarios, such as analyze this abstract and tell me your views on it, or explain to me what you've learned on one of your research placements. So things like that. And actually the scenarios change very little as you move along. So it's good to learn those. There's a couple of books I'll mention at the end, which give some really good detail on scenarios that can come up. In these interviews as well, there are also often clinical scenarios, so things like medical emergencies, which is important because if you do take up an AFP post, you'll have less clinical time because that time will go to the research. So you need to demonstrate that you're good clinically to the examiners. And there's loads to think about at interview. There's loads of things you can show and present to make the examiners think you're really into this. One thing that I really pick up on if I'm doing interviews is enthusiasm. The person has an enthusiasm and a passion about this topic. And ways of showing that are draw on your own experience of a placement which you've really enjoyed and got a lot out of, and bring that into the interview and really use that as the centerpiece to show why you would be a good academic and why you're passionate about this. Okay, so say you've got through a terrible, awful interview experience and you've got a post. If there's one thing I'd recommend if you're about to take up an AFP, it's really plan what you can do early, because 4 months for those of you who've done research is very little time. It flies by. So plan early, even before you start your post. Decide what you're going to do, speak to supervisors, get things sorted, and be realistic about what you're going to achieve. I think for me, it was very important to have some kind of tangible goal. I wanted to have a paper written on this topic by the time I finished, and that helped me focus what I wanted to do, and also helps with the next stage of the pathway. And you'll also have to keep on top of your clinical because you've got less time to meet those clinical objectives, which every foundation doctor has to do. So what happens if you don't get an academic foundation post? It really isn't the end of the world at all. There's loads of opportunities as a foundation doctor to get involved in research. I've got loads of friends who I think probably did more research in their foundation post than me on the academic block. They approached clinical people on the wards. They got involved in clinical studies and projects. They went to loads of conferences and lots of courses, and they did loads of networking. And I don't think it prevented them at all from reaching the next stage, which is the academic clinical fellowship. So yeah, if you don't get a post, you might have to think slightly more laterally about how you're going to get involved in the research and show that interest. So the next two stages of the pathway probably seem in the dim and distant future for many of you, although they do fly by. I think it is important, even if you know the names and what they mean, because probably the most common question I get asked in interviews is, where do I see myself in 10 years time or 5 years time? And if you know that, oh, in 10 years time in the pathway, oh, I should be a clinical lecturer, then that really helps you answer those types of questions. So in the briefest sense, the academic clinical fellowship is a post that's designed to allow you to get ready for PhD applications and postdoctoral applications if you've already got your PhD. You do it when you've decided on your specialty. So you do it in gastroenterology or general practice, and the amount of time that's given over to academic work increases. It's now at 25%. For most of these posts, for me, I'm a GP trainee, so it was 25% over 4 years, a bit longer. And the next step is the clinical lectureship. And this is the first post where you absolutely have to have a PhD to get it. And it's a senior post, really. By this level, you're aiming to develop your own research group by the end of the post. And by the end of the post, you're expecting to be a consultant or a GP, really. And again, more of your time is devoted to research. Now, you may be thinking that I've missed a key step in the pathway. And this is probably the only key step, really. It's the key thing you have to have to reach a senior academic level. All the other steps are optional, I'd say. Useful, but optional. So the reason it doesn't fit really neatly into this pathway is you can do your PhD at loads of points along it. Lots of people do it in medical school, in the MB PhD, as I mentioned. You can do it here after the clinical lectureship. That's probably the most common time, and you can do it at multiple points. I'm being a bit different and taking time out of training to do it. But as long as you've got it done before you apply for your clinical lectureship, that's fine. And we could spend, a whole hour talking about PhDs, but just a couple of things I think are worthwhile considering. If you're thinking about doing one in the near future, I think carefully about the timing of it. As I've said, for me, doing it in medical school would have been the wrong thing because I would have chosen a topic of no relevance to what I really want to do now. And you may have personal reasons or reasons of your clinical training for choosing different times. I think by far the most important thing when choosing a PhD is choosing a really good supervisor who you get on really well with. You're going to be spending 3 or 4 years of your life working really closely with this supervisor and this team, and you really want to make sure that that's a good experience. And actually, I think project in a way is less important, because if you have a good supervisor, I think 99 times out of 100 you'll have a really good project as well. So I think that's the pathway, but I don't think I'd be doing my job properly if I didn't talk a little bit about the challenges that you may face along the way, and that we all face, really. I think at some point you will feel like this. Everyone does. You'll feel frustrated or stressed, and there's lots of reasons for that. There's no denying that academic careers are competitive. You're applying for jobs which are limited, and you're applying for grants which are finite, and that can be stressful at times if you don't like competition. At some point along this pathway, you will be faced with rejections. BMJ has an acceptance rate of 5%, I think, now. So even the best academics you can imagine will get rejections reasonably regularly. So it's something that you've got to get used to, and if you can, use it to propel you on and learn from it, which is easier said than done, I know. And it is a long road. We looked at a pathway that is 10 to 15 years of your life, and at times it can seem like a big challenge to keep going. I'm doing my PhD. Lots of my colleagues and friends who started at the same time as me in medicine are consultants or qualified GPs now. So you have to be prepared for that. And I think the key thing which gets you through this is knowing why you're doing this, why you're interested in an academic career, and why you're passionate about it. And I think it's different for almost everyone I speak to. But for me, I think it allows me to be curious. It allows me to ask questions that I find interesting. I can go into the clinic, see a patient, and a question pops up from that, and I can take that to the research setting and try and answer it. And I find that really interesting, really exciting. So that's one thing that keeps me interested. Another thing is you're generally contributing to something bigger than yourself. When you're doing academic medicine, you're contributing to understanding a disease or improving services within the NHS and things which can help a large number of people. And I think that does keep you motivated. It does give you a reason to go that extra mile and work that extra evening. And lastly, for me, I really enjoy the variety. So I really enjoy my clinical work, but I also enjoy getting off and doing some coding. And I think that variety keeps both things interesting for me. So I like that. So just to recap what we've been through, we've talked a bit about the structure of the pathway. The key thing here is it is flexible. It's there to help you. You don't have to go along every step of the pathway if you've reasons not to. I definitely make the most of certainly some of the opportunities to do research in academic medicine at medical school, and I pick up on some of the opportunities to show your interest and demonstrate that you're passionate about this, like writing a couple of letters on something or getting involved in committees, things like that. And I really get to know a bit about why you're doing this, what's driving you forward, because that will keep you going all the way along along the pathway if you can answer that question. So yeah. And lastly, I think we've really just scratched the surface with the academic careers and academic pathways. There's loads of resources out there, and the National Society of Research has loads of stuff. I think there's loads of other websites. If you go to BMJ Careers, you'll find loads of articles about people's experiences. And if you're starting to apply for interviews, there's a couple of really good books that I'd recommend listed at the bottom. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Garth. That was very interesting. So if anyone has any questions, just pop them on the chat and I'll read them out. Okay, so we've got, what is the process for getting an ACF?
Okay, so ACFs do vary a bit by specialty, and they vary by region you apply, but effectively you generally have to go through the standard application process for whatever specialty, and you also have to go through an academic process. Typically that is like the academic foundation. It's white space answers asking a bit about your skill set. It might be what you've learned from a research job that you've been involved in, and interviews again. And those interviews tend to just focus on the academic aspects. So yeah, but it's worth looking at the post because they do vary. These things vary a lot.
Thank you. And we have, are there any specific research skills courses that you would recommend for medical students?
Ooh, that's a good question. Does the National Society of Medical Research run one?
Yeah,
It used to.
We do have a one. It was supposed to be sort of a month ago, but obviously it had to be postponed. So next year, we're hoping to run it again. It's a free course in London, and you just have to sign up for it. I think spaces are limited, but it is a day of research skills, so that's one.
Yeah, I think it depends on your interest a bit as well. If you're interested in doing coding or statistics, you might want to do that. If you just want general lab skills, I'm sure there's somewhere for that. There's lots of systematic review courses. So I think it depends a bit on your interest, but yeah.
The next one is, does doing ACF enable you to get funding for PhD, sort of by NIHR funding?
Yeah, so you don't have to have done an ACF to get NIHR funding. Some of my colleagues didn't. I think it gives you some time to prepare for the NIHR applications. So the whole point of an ACF in a way is to get you ready and geared up to do those application processes, because NIHR funding for PhDs is quite a big deal. It's quite a big process. You'll be spending, I think, probably months filling in that application and going through that process. So I think it really does help if you're applying for NIHR PhD funding, but it's not a prerequisite as far as I know. And I know people who've done it without an ACF.
Thank you. The next one is, can graduate entry students use research experience prior to med school in AFP applications?
I don't see why not. I think you can. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to. But I think probably check the application process, because they do like to change them on almost a yearly basis. But I think so. From when I did it, I think you could. Yeah.
Thank you. Someone has asked, could you expand on what you mean by research scholarships? I received one from my university for a summer project. Would that count?
Yeah, I think that would count, definitely. There's loads of small charities that offer these kind of things as well. The Wellcome Trust offers summer research scholarships. So there's lots out there, but if you were given funding by your university to fund you to do some summer research, I would definitely think you could put that down as a scholarship or a bursary. Yeah, that'll be fine.
Thank you. During the clinical lectureship, will it double the time it takes to get CCT, as it's 50-50 clinical academia?
No. So the lectureship would end when you get CCT, basically, as far as I'm aware. So it doesn't have to be 4 years if you get CCT earlier.
Thank you. I'll skip the AFP specific questions just because we have a AFP talk in a few weeks, which probably would be answered there. Is it possible to publish without a supervisor, i.e. with medical students collaborating for work conducted in your own time?
I think it is possible. I think it's certainly possible to publish the kind of non-peer reviewed things, like opinion pieces, letters. And I did, when I was a student, I did write a couple of small research peer-reviewed pieces. I think it is more tricky. It's great to have the support and guidance of someone who's been through the processes, and that can be helpful. But it's certainly not impossible with a group of students to publish things. Absolutely not.
We'll take a few others. So how do you decide on a PhD topic, and how do you identify a good supervisor? Do you do it based on their research productivity only?
Good question. So I think it is really tricky to choose a good supervisor. And so I definitely wouldn't go just by productivity, because this is someone who you're going to be working really closely with. And if, they could be the greatest researcher in the world and really good at publishing things, but if you don't get on and they're not going to give you good guidance, they're not going to be a good supervisor for you. So to find a good supervisor, I would definitely meet them at least a couple of times. I might speak to a member of their group. If you can, ask them if you can speak to a member of their group, someone who's done a PhD with them, and in confidence get their honest opinion. Finding a good project is difficult, and you're probably going to spend an awful lot of time preparing PhD applications, and maybe a year building up that project. So yeah, but yeah, I think as long as you've got a good supervisor, they can give you really good input on what to have in that PhD project.
Thank you. There's one for me about the AFP talk, so that's 2 weeks today, and the details will be posted on Facebook again, so keep a lookout. And we'll take one more question. So how is the research time in the ACF and ACL spread out? Can you choose to do it all in one block? And I was told once that you don't need to do both the AFP and the ACF. Is that true?
So the time in the ACF and ACL posts, how it's spread out, differs by the post. So it's worthwhile looking into that. And some are really flexible. So I did mine in Manchester, and just like the academic foundation, they basically allowed you to decide how you wanted to split your time. But I know some are much more rigid, and you can't do that. So it's worth looking at the post. And at ACL level, you're getting into much more senior levels here. So I think it's generally going to be a discussion between the hospital that you're working at and you, between how that time is going to be split. I haven't done the ACL post, so I'm definitely not an expert on that. And you definitely don't need to do both the academic foundation program and ACF. And I've got loads of friends who skipped out the academic foundation post and just went straight into ACF, or vice versa. So it's not necessary. As I say, it's there to help you. If you feel that post would be useful, do it. If you don't, then that's absolutely fine. You can still apply for PhDs basically regardless of what you do before you apply for the PhD.
Great. So I think, shall we leave it there? If you have any other questions, sort of get in touch with us, or Garth, would you mind if they email you?
Yeah, absolutely. My email's at the bottom.
The email currently on the screen.
Bottom of the screen. So feel free if you've got any questions. I'm more than happy to help.
Yeah. So thank you very much for attending, everyone. As I said, the AFP one is 2 weeks from today. And again, if you have any ideas of sort of the talks you'd like us to give, then get in touch and we'll try to sort something out. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.
Hope you enjoyed. Thank you, Garth, for doing that.
You're welcome. Everyone, good luck. Bye now.